we've handed out, what we've done since our last session was to go through the articles that you identified at the end of last time around to try and see where we have some common ground or can present some counter proposals. And so what we're presenting to you today is a couple of things which are packaged together with the Articles 10 and 11, which were the compensation and benefits. And I'll go through each one because most of the copies handed out don't have the track changes. So I'll point out what we did with, you have Article 7, which is the reduction in force article, and Article 14, right to privacy article. We took your language from those and then added some proposed changes to it. So we want to look at maybe Article 7 first. I'll walk through the differences between what the union proposed back in, I think, in your initial offer and what we proposed as a change. So if you have in front of you Article 7, Section 1 is no change from the union proposal. Section 1, that's 1A. 1B has a change. The union's initial proposal provided for advance notice of reduction in force layoff of 6 months. So what we've proposed is not a bright line 6 months, but that we endeavor to provide 6 months, however, recognizing circumstances sometimes don't allow for that, that we'll commit to minimum 30 days, but try and provide 6 months. Thinking really here is that it's usually budget driven. Hopefully, and to this point, I don't think we've had to have reduction in force. If it's a reduction in force that's driven by a program change, you may have the 6 months notice. We may see that coming, so we'll provide it there. But if it's a budget driven thing, you may not know until June. Very infrequent, however, so we don't anticipate it having that coming, but you never know. Section 1C is no change from the union's initial proposal. Section 1D, there is a change. We've added the idea of this comparable position. So if you're subject to layoff and there is a vacancy in a comparable position, then certainly we'll commit to not laying you off, put you in the comparable position. But it's somewhat of a change. What the union's proposal initially was, we'll put you in any vacant position for which you're credentialed and qualified. So we changed credentialed and qualified to comparable position.
And on the red line here, I see that the comparable position is there in both of those first two sentences. I see credentialed and qualified in the first sentence, and I see it struck in the second sentence. I was just curious why the difference.
So the second sentence, first sentence deals with a vacancy. Second one deals with somebody who's not on continuing contract. Yeah, I'm not sure that it really changes the position. Presumably, in the second sentence, if you have a non-continuing contract employee holding a comparable position, in the continuing contract, the thought here is a continuing contract employee bumps the non-continuing contract. You would have to be credentialed and qualified in addition to having comparable. I don't know that that's a big change, Graham. It might just have been, I might have thought it moot, but.
Okay. I'm just trying to think of.
And the theory is any position, if you're subject to layoff, you'd have to be both credentialed, qualified, and it have to be a comparable position.
Right.
So we may be able to put that language back in.
Yeah, I'm not sure it makes an enormous difference either way. I guess what would be an example of a position, of a case where there's a position where the employee is credentialed and qualified, but it's not comparable?
Well, I think you can see that employees, I don't know all employees, but employees may have various qualifications, background and whatnot. They may be technically qualified to teach this course, but they've never done it for 20 years. We're not going to bump somebody else out or automatically put you into it if I'm thinking comparable position, something along the lines of what you've done. You know, maybe there's a position not at this campus, but a similar one at another campus, we would put you in that one. But you know, when it comes to qualifications, I'm assuming faculty might have multiple qualifications and whatnot, even though they may never have taught in a particular area. You had a minor in Spanish, but you've been a biology instructor your whole life. Would we put you in a Spanish course? Probably not automatically. That kind of thing. That's really the thought of it. So
Right.
not trying to be controversial there, just.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the example you gave there kind of makes sense. I guess when we were thinking position that you're credentialed and qualified, I think we were kind of assuming, like, you know, you held a degree and there's a position in the department or something. I guess we weren't, what is a position? I think we sort of assumed that just meant a faculty position within a particular department or something.
Yeah, and that's why I said it's not really meant to be very controversial change, just kind of clarifying it a little bit. It does come up occasionally, not typically in higher ed. If there's a different wording than comparable to get that thought, I don't know that we're wed to that, but
Okay, we'll think about it.
I mean, when we approach these kinds of things, certainly the philosophy of employers is, I'm sure you're not going to be too surprised, what's best for the college and students, that sort of thing. So somebody who may have a technical qualification but really has no experience, we would be very hesitant to say we're going to bump somebody else out of that. You know, not likely to happen, we understand that, but so that's the thought with the suggested change to section 1D. 1E, there was a change. And again, it's kind of the same thought you had. The union's proposal had that you get 120 days notice to the employee that might be affected. And we essentially said we're going to provide that notice same time we would have to provide it to the union, which was minimum 30 days endeavor to do 6 months, or as soon as the decision's made. Sometimes we give notice to the union that there's a layoff coming 6 months from now, but you don't know who's getting laid off. You got 10 employees in a position, and you know you gotta get lay off 2 and keep 8. But as soon as the decision's made, there's no reason from an employer standpoint not to notify the employees.
Could I ask what the common practice is now? In other words, like, say, I know we haven't done it, but if we did have to do it, do you currently sort of provide a pink slip with the notice of you might be laid off, but we don't know yet in 6 months at that time for everybody that it could potentially affect? Or do you wait and find out who it affects and then notify them? Does that make sense?
Well, and I can't speak to Pascal Hernando if there hasn't been any, but
I can speak to a faculty perspective. Brian, we can talk about general employment.
Yeah, but administrative-wise, it's required, I think we do the 30-day notice. So
Right.
we try and do it way ahead of that. We did it a few years back when we outsourced the custodial. And we let the employees know, I think it was 60 days ahead of time. And there's actually policies and IMMs and procedures in place of how you do that, notify it. We notified them way before the minimum requirement.
Correct.
And then there's also
But are they potential layoffs, or are they people who will definitely be laid off?
in that case, they were people who were reduced,
Definitely.
reduction in force because it was outsourced. I don't think the 12 years I've been here, we've never had that
Right.
situation where we, because what we've done in the past when we've had cutbacks is 3 months. When we get into March, we usually in the budget say, let's not fill positions because we don't want to do that. Fill it for 3 months.
And lay
And
them
then
off
make a
3 months
decision
later.
laying off. So a couple of years when we had bad budget years, we did that.
Mhm.
So yes, we eliminated positions, but people weren't in the positions.
Right.
So that's,
I'm only
Yeah,
asking
Right.
because my
Experience
experience
I've
at the
had.
K-12 is that if they know it's coming, there's usually a group of people that it could potentially affect, and then they pretty much
Mhm.
send them all pink slips of you might be laid off, but
Mhm.
we're not sure
Yeah.
yet, but we're giving you this 6 months, and I was just
Right.
curious if you
No,
guys do the same thing.
I agree with Brian, we've not done that. The one caveat, for instance, is with faculty, and we hate to do this with faculty, but we have had situations because of the budgetary process where we were unable to commit to faculty to have continued annual contract opportunities. So in the past, we have hired non-recurring positions for faculty lines
Okay.
with because it's a clear need, but
Right.
not knowing where the budget's going to be the following year. In good faith, we had to express to our faculty, to the candidates, that there's no guarantee that this
Sure.
position will be available next year. It's predicated on
Grant
budget.
money or
Exactly.
something, yeah.
However, what we do for the next year in academic affairs is we wouldn't put it there if it were not necessary. So we
Mhm.
then catapult that to the top of the priority list for our faculty to make sure that if there's still a need, that we're going to make sure that we're going to advocate for those non-annual positions first
Mhm.
before any new positions. And we've done that, and those positions that were non-annual based became recurring now.
Okay.
So that's fine. And the one reduction in force that we did in a program was a programmatic closure.
Right,
We had
yeah.
recall we had our health informatics program. We closed that program for various purposes, rationale. And that full-time faculty member was given ample opportunity, ample notice. We did a teach out for those students, and still were able to keep her employed until a set date.
Cool.
Yeah,
It's a few years back, we had a couple positions that we called non-recurring.
Correct.
I think 2 were faculty.
yes.
But as Dr. Jeanette said, the priority was to get those when we had reoccurring money to
Mhm.
allocate those, which we did.
Yes.
I think we're still carrying 1.5 positions as non-recurring, but they're administrative
Right.
positions.
Okay.
And I can tell you from my experience in other contexts, nobody, both employer and employee, likes surprises, and they definitely don't like the surprise of, hey, you've been selected for layoff,
Right.
here's your last paycheck kind of thing. So exactly as Brian and Dr. Jeanette are explaining, they usually have a hierarchy. When we get to the point where we know we're probably cutting positions, you take away vacant positions. Usually my recommendation is let employees who might be affected know that this may be coming,
Mhm.
even though you're not yet selected, because that does a couple of things. One, if somebody's looking at retiring or whatever, maybe they leave early, you get that attrition where they have other opportunities. They go and get other opportunities before that final paycheck hits. And a lot of times, knock on wood, the problem takes care of itself. And occasionally, though, you end up having to make that decision. So usually, if you have an employer side a timeline in mind, you know it might be coming, you notify employees, and then you have a sort of drop dead date. Here's where we have to make decisions, and then there's a second round of communication saying you've been selected.
Okay.
And a lot of times there's discussion amongst employees, employer, unions involved with the union during that time frame to provide input on the selection process. When you have multiple candidates, some are keeping their jobs, some aren't, trying to figure all that out. So usually the employer and employees are on the same wavelength. They're trying to provide information and avoid the surprise.
Because we talked about the challenge with the budget is usually the session doesn't end until May if it ends on time. So it's, and we don't really know what's going on to the last minute because it's waffling all over the place. Now, the years where it's an election year, that gets wrapped up in March, which that's great because then we know further ahead of time, how to, react and plan for that. But that creates a little bit of the challenge of trying to figure out way far ahead of time what the effects could be. So just really the state process makes it difficult.
So that's the section 1 of Article 7, essentially.
Oh, before you go on.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of add on, I was kind of curious. I came from a regular job prior to education, and sometimes the employer would, if they were going to reduce the employees, they would give them like 5 points or 6 points to get them up to retirement. Does a academic institution do things like that, or is that just in a more regular or IT type job?
Yeah, I can't speak
Oh,
to
okay.
Pasco Hernando, but I've had instances where other employers have offered, when we know we have to cut back offered various incentives, whether it's early retirement, severance pay, outplacement services. I haven't seen it in higher education very often, to be honest with you, but I haven't really seen a lot of program or reduction in forces in higher ed. Certainly with faculty, you're generally a little more insulated unless you're in a program that just isn't working. You know, your college is going to probably cut faculty as a last resort. So I
think
haven't seen it.
some schools have done it in the years past, but it's very limited on how much you can pay people out, how many weeks. It's all by statute.
It would be difficult in the public setting here to do anything on the retirement side, I think, because it's statutorily driven. So what you would end up, if you were looking at incentives, is trying to negotiate compensation, severance. You know, some of the stuff is addressed here, right of being able to come back if there are vacancies, have a period of time for you're first in line, you know, that kind of thing. So, but in the public sector, you're more limited. Private sector, it's not uncommon to have early retirement incentives and things of that nature. But
That's a good question.
Yeah, no,
Because
just
some of
was
the
curious
schools have
about
done
that.
incentives when there wasn't budget problems to have people retire out.
Mm.
But most
They've done it
people,
before.
you can't give them a package that's better than what they're getting in drop and the other
I know.
things. So it really doesn't entice people to leave early when there's not a budget situation. So they really haven't been very successful at that, the schools have done it.
Yeah, we did it in my old school, but we didn't have drop, it was a different state, so there was no great incentive to stay for 30-plus years. It was more like, oh, we can retire now and we won't lose our lifetime benefits, out the door we go. And that was the incentive.
so the biggest change, I think, what you'll see in the Article 7, reduction of forces, in Section 2, the union's initial proposal proposed a point system in trying to determine who would be subject to layoff when you have multiple candidates and not everybody's laid off. Candidly, we're not a fan of the point system. What we proposed is a non-exclusive list of factors here where we'll look, and it's usually the good, again, looking at higher ed, I think ordinarily there's less controversy with these things, because it's not as if you have 100 factory workers and you got to get rid of 20, and all of them generally are doing the same job. You guys are all very specialized, and so typically when you're looking at a pool of candidates, if you have multiple candidates, it's a much smaller pool, but it can happen. It does happen occasionally. So what we've proposed, again, the overriding concern here is what's in the best interests of the college and students. We want to maintain, if you have multiple faculty members, then you don't need to lay off all of them. You look at these factors, including accreditation standards, program needs, things of that nature, qualifications, credential, all of these things. And of course, this ties back to the first section, where if you're on continuing contract, you're in line ahead of non-continuing contract, obviously. But no single factor is dispositive, and it's really just because of the nature of these things that the decisions are all pretty particularized. So if you're in a program that's being terminated, it's pretty straightforward.
It looks like there may be a copy paste issue.
Sorry, let me see.
Starting on the third underline, if you're looking
But
at
in the
the,
event, let me
yeah, it looks like there's two in the event of a layoff type of sentences.
Yeah, it could be. That's just a typo. Yeah, it's just supposed to be in the event of a layoff.
I mean, I think I get the thrust of it, but.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and these factors listed here are sort of the ones that we came up with, or we think would be very important to any of those kinds of decisions. If there are other factors, again, we're not wed to the language. I think it's appropriate we can talk about those. But we didn't like the idea of a strict point system, basically, if you, X points for this, X points for that, and you just total the points, and there's no flexibility in that system. Given the particularized nature of these types of decisions, I think that would not work well. So that's section 2. Section 3. Really here, section 3 is just more clarifying and cleaning up. The idea with the recall section is if you are subject to layoff, you get first in line for jobs that become available. Again, with your qualified credential, you'll see that I added comparable position again in there. Same thought as with section 1. So if it's a budget-driven thing, for example, 1 year, but the budget's better the following year, or position's reestablished, you're at the top of the list, and you get an opportunity to come back. I did add in here some language in B1 where if we have a vacancy, we'll notify anybody on layoff status by email. And I added some language there if the employee has provided us with an email, which presumably if you're being laid off, we'd ask you to give us your email or whatnot, but you'd have to provide that. Make sure we can reach you, in other words. And you had in section B3 reference to the point system if you have multiple candidates. And since we proposed to do away with the point system, modified that, or if you have multiple layoff people on your recall list, the one determined by the college to be best suited for the open position is who would get the first crack at it. If that person turns it down, then it goes down the list and so forth. Section 4, I struck out some language that you had. You have essentially, you get a recall offer, you have 15 days to accept it. I left that in, that was the union's proposal. And I think that's a reasonable time period. If you don't accept within 15 days, we go to the next candidate. But you also had language that it would take effect no later than the beginning of the semester following the date the offer is made. And I struck that simply because it's trying to predict the future, not sure. If you're making an offer, we have an open position. Presumably we have a need, or whether it's immediate, following semester, the summer, whatnot, it would go effective as soon as the position's essentially slated for, which I would guess would be the start of the next semester, but it might be earlier, it might be, can you come back tomorrow, and that kind of thing, or it might be, maybe we can notify you in December for a position that's going to be opening up starting in the summer, who knows, but I just didn't see the point in putting that language in there and committing one way or the other. And then in number 5, B5, just added language. The union's initial proposal said if the reemployment offer is rejected, you get no further recall rights. I just added it, in addition to rejected, if you don't respond to the offer within that 15 days, basically. Which frankly happens probably more often than the rejection. Again, I don't have a lot of experience seeing that you have a lot of layoffs in higher ed, but in other scenarios we do, and it's not uncommon to send out an offer and just never hear back. And usually it's, it's understandable when people moved on, they got other jobs or whatnot. So, we did not commit in section 6. This is more of a substantive change. The union's initial proposal said if you accept a reemployment offer, you resume at the same rank, contract status, and salary. I struck out the salary, kept the same rank and contract status. The reason for that is simple. If we have a position that pays less than what you had before, but you're credentialed, qualified, comparable, we'll offer it to you. You're not necessarily can't commit that it's going to be at the same salary. If it's the same position, it may be at the same salary, but my experience is we'll offer you anything we have. Most employers will do that recognizing that it may not be ideal, but it might be worth considering, and leave it up to you whether or not you take it or not. It wouldn't be used as a way to reduce wages and salaries. I know that's some place. Well, you'll lay me off and then offer to rehire me the next semester at a lower wage and salary. I mean, that would be a pretty obvious attempt to circumvent other provisions. So again, it doesn't happen in higher ed very often, but that's our proposal on reduction in force. And we present as part of a package with our compensation and benefits. Article 14.3 is your right to privacy article. Unless you guys had questions on the layoff reduction force.
I think the recall part is pretty straightforward, and we'll obviously have to talk about the criteria.
Can I ask for your justification for a year? Like, why only 1 year?
For recall,
Not longer?
really it's just an administrative issue. The thought being that if you have a longer list, you're likely to move on if you're a faculty member, hopefully have found other employment. But from our perspective, it's difficult to keep track of recall. So hiring people, we will commit to making sure we keep track of it, or we'll violate the contract for 12 months. But we definitely don't like indefinite things, because people change, the hiring people change, HR people change, and suddenly somebody doesn't know that they're supposed to email this person before filling the position. So, and again, I'm not sure that 12 months, what I've seen in standard contracts usually 12 or 18 months. I don't know that we can discuss that in great detail, whether we'd be open to something a little bit different for a longer period.
I was just curious, since you put a time limit in there.
The key to me is there should be a time limit so someone can put it on their calendar, whatever, because frankly, the ball will get dropped at some point if you have an indefinite one. And 5 years later, somebody doesn't get an email and didn't get offered a job. We don't want to be in a position where we're having to go back and say, oh, we should have offered this to somebody. Now we're going to bump out this person that was just hired. It's more keeping track of it. Right to privacy. So I started with the union's language as the template, but made some changes to it. So let me walk through the changes. So in subsection 14.3A, the biggest key is twofold. The union's proposal said the employee had a right to privacy with regard to their personal and private lives, including but not limited to religious and political activities. I modified that sentence slightly to say, we, the employer, recognize employees have a right to have privacy interests, as opposed to right to privacy. And I'll get to the whys of that in a moment. And then added the second part of that second sentence that says the union and bargaining unit employees in turn recognize these privacy interests are not absolute, and that non-college related conduct can be detrimental to college. So the union's initial proposal did have language that was sort of the caveat. You have a right to privacy in your personal effects unless such actions are demonstrably detrimental to colleges. That was the union's language. And what I'm trying to do here is to make it clear that yes, faculty members, as all employees of the college, do have privacy interests in their off-duty conduct and beliefs and things of that nature, but they are not absolute. I mean, it's sometimes I find to be a common misconception that employees believe that anything they do on their own time can't be factored in by their employer, which is absolutely not accurate under the law. There are things that you guys can do on your off-duty time that could get you fired. Hopefully, it's not going to happen, but But you go out and you rob a bank or you shoot somebody, we're probably not going to keep you as a faculty. That kind of extreme example, I know, but
Well, if you rob a bank, you won't need the job.
right, yeah. If successful, yes, maybe.
You'll be in prison, right? You won't get a job.
Yeah.
Or you'll be in Costa Rica or someplace living out your retirement.
But at the same token, the employer, I always tell employers, there are some, particularly in the public sector, off-duty things that are off limits, and what you have here, religious, political views, things of that nature, are the typical ones that we can't take action against you for those things. And under the law, and I think we have some of this built into some of our other provisions on my recollection on the speech issue. The courts look at it as a balancing test, so they're off very few bright lines. So what I've thought of trying to do here was to say, yes, we're okay with the right to privacy clause, but we want the employees who read it to know that you have some interest, but college also has interest. And kind of try and tie it on, it's not ideal when you don't have these bright lines. I add that last sentence where it says, accordingly, the employer, union, and employees each commit to appropriately balancing these privacy interests in administration of the agreement, college policies, and in their respective actions and decisions. Sort of aspirational type language, I understand, but leaves both sides with an understanding that you have rights, but they're not absolute. That's really the intent of it. The second part was pertained to drug-free workplace policy. So we changed a little bit of language here, and college does have a drug-free workplace policy. Changed it to essentially say we can implement it. There was a lot of language in your proposal, the union's proposal, about prescriptions and things of that nature. You could, and I don't know if that's a reference to medical marijuana or not. It may be, and it has come up in probably every one of my union negotiations in the last 2 years about medical marijuana, but 100% of the employers I represent have not agreed to that. And in part because it's still in a murky area, as you no doubt know, marijuana, even though passed in Florida for medical related purposes, is still unlawful under federal law. And in fact, the current Florida law says employers don't have to allow it. I expect we'll see a lot of development in this over the next year. I don't know that's an issue again here, higher administration. I don't know that we don't do random testing at the moment, correct? So, the state is probably going to, in this next session, legislative session, have to readdress the issue of how to implement it in Florida because of some court cases that came out last month. And at some point, the federal government will figure out what they're going to do. But current administration, federal government, your guess is as good as mine as to what they do. So, but current state of law is that it's murky. So, what we put here is basically we reserve the right to drug test for our current policy, which does not currently test but random drug test.
So if I read the current policy, it was a long time ago. The current policy just includes like reasonable suspicion testing, anything else, or is that pretty much?
I guess the only testing you guys are doing right now, current employees, is a reasonable suspicion test. So I don't know if you guys know offhand you test all faculty upon hire or application. Maybe
We do.
Health
You guys-
programs, faculty
The health.
are screened.
Do a criminal background check.
Right, and you did have that already in your proposal, that last sentence, where there's a program assigned to a site or whatnot that already requires something like that as the health one someone can do. Yeah, we do follow that, of course. that was already in your policy. I took out some language you had on the EAP because that's part of the benefits article. There's a section on the EAP program. So there was not really an intent to change or do anything different than what you currently have. So the drug section is really meant to just codify what the current practice is. Then turning to Article 11. Article 10, by the way, the compensation article is the same as presented at the last session. But Article 11, what I've tried to do is I've taken our draft, administration draft of Article 11 that was presented last time and looked at some of the language that the union presented last time and trying to get closer together here. And it's a little bit difficult to follow, so on your copy, Graham, and I'll email you this so you can send it out to your team. I put comments on it to try and show what I've done. But basically under section 3, or excuse me, 4, there's a numbering issue. The first section 4, let's see, there are 2. Short that way. The clean version. That's a typo. There's 2 section 4s that get incorporated in the track changes. First section 4A, I took from the union's proposal that sentence that starts bargaining unit members shall also have access to CCORP. That was in your proposal. I assume we still do that. And just lifted that and put it in our proposal. We don't have a problem with that. And the second section 4A, titled Future Changes. This is really where the meat of it is, where we had the biggest difference. Your proposal was we provide 6 months notice, and if you want, we negotiate. Our proposal was we could give you notice, but we don't have to negotiate, but we won't do anything different than what we do for everybody else. So 4A and B, trying to propose a compromise. And there's a typo. For A, should say college will not change. The opposite. It says provided the college will change its current practice of paying for employee-only premiums. I didn't mean to scare you guys, but it should say the college will not change the current practice. In other words, what we're saying in 4A is we may have to change the insurance based upon what the consortium tells us, but we'll commit to 2 things. Essentially, we'll provide for the faculty the same that we provide for everybody else, and we won't change without negotiating the current practice of paying for the employee coverage. So then section B was trying to take your language and our language and reach a middle ground. That's entirely new language. Where we basically say, look, consortium tells us we're eliminating a plan or one of the options. We're going to tell you guys when we find out. And then you can discuss it with us and provide us any input, information, strategies, clarification, whatnot. But in the end, we'll agree to talk all day long. We can't agree to negotiate to delay the implementation date. And really, that's just a nod to reality that is usually out of our control. And what I've been told, and I think we mentioned this last time, is there is a real possibility that the consortium might change some of the options for everybody, not just Pasco Hernando, for everybody, in terms of some of the Cadillac plan options that they're referred to, whether they continue to offer it. Nothing for this year in that regard, but maybe as early as the following year. If that happens, we don't have the clout, the college here, to say, well, we're going to force the consortium or any other insurance to continue those plans. You will still have options. We'll still pay for whatever options, and there may be substitute options, but you can ask us to negotiate that all day long, but our hands are going to be tied because the consortium is not going to agree. But we recognize you have interest in it just as we do, so the thought would be, when they put us on notice that this plan might be going away, we put you on notice, we sit down, you understand it the same we understand it. If you have questions, we bring them to the consortium and try and do it as a kind of team effort. But in the end, what the consortium says goes, unless it's so bad that we go somewhere else, which is a possibility but not as realistic. So that's sort of the proposed compromise between you have to negotiate every change and our initial proposal, which was we don't have to negotiate anything. So that's the intent of section 4B.
Okay, just a couple, I guess, hypotheticals. One, I guess you kind of hinted at. So if whatever the consortium decides is so bad that, in your guys' opinion, we should leave and go elsewhere, is that decision under this language bargainable, or do you have that authority sort of unilaterally?
Well, candidly, from this language, we would be able to do that unilaterally, at least to not delay the implementation. I think the intent is we can negotiate it, but the issue there is going to be the timing, whether or not you can negotiate enough. I think we can agree, and maybe we can tweak the language to say we're okay with negotiating, but we don't want to be in a position of not to delaying the implementation when we have a due date from whatever insurer. So when that happens, my experience has been usually what we end up doing is we end up having to agree with whatever this insurance company or the consortium wants to do, and then we go through a process of saying we now have to look at viable alternatives, including maybe other providers. And that's probably a year-long process. You start getting quotes, you sit down with people and whatnot. We don't have a problem with involving the union in that process, I don't think. But in the meantime, we may have to agree to go with our best approach, just from a timing issue.
Okay. Other hypothetical. I think this language is very clear about what happens if the consortium eliminates plans that are currently available. But under this language, would the college have, again, the unilateral authority to just decide to pick different plans as long as it continues to pay?
Different
You know,
offer
the
from the
employee-
consortium or different from other.
Right. I mean, I guess from the consortium. But yeah, let's say we say, oh, well, we've got plans A, B, and C. We'd like to do plans D, E, and F. Is that a decision that under this language would have to be bargained?
I think we would take the position, certainly, and we can clarify the language, that we do have the ability to do that. And I don't know experience and how we've been working with the consortium, whether they do it, those sort of things. But we do have the right to select amongst the various plans offered.
Okay.
And the reason for that, quite frankly, is it's somewhat of a trade-off from the employer perspective. We're trying, again, we commit to, we'll pay for the employee coverage, and we give you what we give everybody else. Recognize that if the plan is less beneficial, we're not going to do that just to do that, because it affects all these guys as well. And but it's somewhat of a trade-off, recognizing that there are costs involved. And historically, health insurance costs has been one of the big cost items and personnel costs. So when you have various menu items to choose from, when we're committing to pay for the entire premium, for example, which a lot of employers don't do anymore, they have a percentage, but you may have to select different mixes and offer and options to do that to be able to make the ends meet. The alternative would be, well, we can sit down, we'll agree to never change it, but then we have to start looking at, well, if that cost for those particular options are skyrocketing, do we split the cost more with employees? Right now, we have the flexibility, and under this language, to be able to pick and choose that. Where we don't have the flexibility, we're not going to take away, we pay the premium for it without negotiating, changing the contract. So, sort of a trade-off.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I understand the difficulties there. I've been in more insurance discussions than I care to remember, but I'm just asking the question so my team
Yeah.
understands all the different possibilities, and they'll tell me how important or how big of a deal it is for that unilateral authority to be there.
Section 5, which, when renumbered correctly, will be section 6, is just taken from Neil's proposal. We just lifted that wholesale. Didn't have an issue with it. So that's the package that we have today. And what we did with the other articles that you proposed that might have some value as part of the package is some of them we were not candidly willing to agree to, which was childcare, parking issue, part for the reasons mentioned last time, although I think we still trying to talk about some of the concerns you raised. The leave article, I think there can be some common ground there, but frankly, we're not in a position to figure out. Our proposal on the leave stuff is really to try and codify the status quo. We need to update some of those provisions, as even our IMM, I think, are out of date on some of those. And we started going through that and got bogged down pretty quickly. So we left it out of the package, but it's not necessarily an indication that it completely rejected out of hand. So in conclusion, the summary for today is our package is Article 10, 11, and those two new ones, Article 7 and 14.3.
Okay.
And I will reiterate one last thing, Graham, before
Sure.
sorry to interrupt you. The wage package hasn't changed, the Article 10. But that's supposed to go into effect in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So, in part, one of the things we're looking at doing is whether we can reach an MOU on some of that to enact these kinds of changes. And if you guys are open to it, I don't think we care if you want to do it that way, and then, as we with the last one, continue to negotiate over these things. That's fine as part of the overall agreement. Or set it in stone, but whatever you want to do, there is a little bit of a deadline coming up with the wage issue. It doesn't have to happen right away. It
Right.
could always be delayed, but we'd rather not.
If you have a MOU that you want to bring for us to look at, when we come back from caucus, I think we'd be happy to look at it.
I mean, ideally, what the MOU would look like would be this package in just agreement form. Or, if you have heartburn about something in the privacy section, for example, I don't know that we're too concerned about getting that MOU now, but we included the reduction in force and privacy as part of our package because you're looking for some of those things, which again, whether you include as an MOU or TA on, that doesn't make, we don't care about.
Okay.
But the 11 and 10 to us, we would want packaged together, MOU or TA.
Just a couple of the other pieces that we've mentioned, wanting to have some more discussion about, kind of in conjunction with all this, were the discipline article and the tenure promotion and rank article. I heard you say that you either weren't able to agree to proposals or weren't ready to respond, but on various other ones, but I didn't hear. Are there those ones that you had a chance to consider?
We did talk about it, and we are not in position to agree to the last proposal of the union. Still looking at possible ways to bridge the gap, but candidly have not.
Are you referring specifically to discipline or tenure, promotion, and rank? If there are specific
Discipline is the one that comes to mind. I'm trying to remember what our last. Let's see if I can pull up here. Rank article.
if there were, specific things that you had concerns about, I'd be interested in hearing those before we go to caucus.
On the discipline issue, it's still more of a philosophical difference between the just cause versus what current protections under annual and continuing contracts. Whether we're agreeable to a just cause type standard in general.
Okay. Specific concerns on tenure, promotion, and rank, or
And
not something that can be quickly summarized?
You know what the date of your the union's last proposal on that was?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. On tenure, promotion, rank, we haven't given any proposals since February 8th. There hasn't been any back and forth on that one. Our last discipline was on June 4th.
What we can do is maybe break for caucus, we'll take a look at that one and tell you on the discipline article, we were our current position is the same as our position from June 4th, which our proposal had, I think the biggest difference in both was the just cause. We had added to our last proposal, we would agree to a just cause type standard for disciplinary action short of termination. You didn't point out our initial offer didn't have that covered, but for termination of the contracts, annual or midterm annual contract or continuing contract would be those specified in our IMMs, which are by statute and state board rule. The other biggest difference, I think, was your proposal, if I correct me if I'm wrong, that if you have a termination, you had the option to go to arbitration, an arbitrator under the contract or under the provision of a hearing. You currently have the option to go to a hearing before the board or division administrative hearings. And our proposal was to keep it as is. You have that option to go to the board or division administrative hearings, but not to arbitration. That's still our current position. I think that's really the sticking point of those two issues.
Yeah, and the very last proposal we handed out, we took out the board hearing DOA option and just made it straight arbitration.
Right. We are not agreeable to that.
I'm trying to remember it. I remember having discussion before about not being agreeable to the option, which is why we sort of said, well, if we must choose one, we prefer arbitration. What's the rationale for not preferring that or preferring to keep things as is?
Well, from our view, there's a statute and regulation in place that gives you these options, which are, you get protection, you get a hearing, you have to go through due process, we have to establish one of the causes. And arbitrators they're not as familiar with higher education. And quite frankly, they're, one, costlier, but two, it's very sporadic in terms of their decision-making, whereas DOLA hearing officers and whatnot will follow precedent and that kind of thing, so that's the rationale.
Okay. All right, well, I think we will go discuss. This might be one where we want to take closer to an hour. Kind of, I think, a lot to look at. You want to email me these electronically whenever you get a chance?
Yeah, I'll do that now. We'll talk about the 10-year promotion rank article. Figure out, my recollection is we proposed something on that, but I don't recall where we left it, so we'll go back to the notes and look at it.
I think you proposed the ranks, and pretty much in keeping with the current IMM, but I don't think there was a proposal on the continuing contract process or the promotion process.
Okay, yeah.
What I recall.
I think you're right on that. We'll look at that.
Okay.
Well, we have B109, so then they can stay here if they haven't reserved another one.
You gonna stay here? Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
I know you're
Yeah,
sitting
we
here,
were,
but I
we're
thought
saying,
you
wow,
were-
there's some significant deliberations. And you had lunch activity going on. They're still eating their lunch.
Not yet.
She thought you went, you were,
Working
she
on hungry
was.
stuff,
Yeah.
just like you guys are.
But we do have some things. I've made 5 for your team.
Thank you, sir.
I'll kind of walk through this. There's, in hopes that we can get a lot of things resolved today or otherwise very soon. We're willing to make a lot of concessions on a lot of these other articles. And I'll kind of go through those as we get to them. On Article 6, that's the discipline. Our position remains as it was when we met on June 4th. We're not interested in agreeing to language that excludes termination or any other form of discipline really from the grievance procedure. So that's a very important piece for us, I think. On reduction in force, we have a counter, starting on the second page. As you'll see, we've agreed almost entirely to your language in sections 1 and 3. And in section 2, actually less of that should be underlined than it is. I forgot to accept some of the changes, but we'll just go through it piece by piece. We're willing to settle on 60 days notice, and we're not even necessarily drawing a hard line on that. We were thinking, you mentioned that a reduction in force may be driven by the budget, which is what prevents it to be, is what may prevent, one thing that may prevent providing 6 months of notice, which we understand. But just in kind of looking at the timeline between the budget and when the year starts, it seemed that 30 days, we might be able to do better than 30 days. And, we really think that, given the length of time that candidates often need to search on the academic job market, it's just, it's more complex than, going down the street and sweeping a different floor. That we really need to provide as much notice as we can. So we threw out 60 days, kind of in recognition that this may be budget driven and 6 months is not possible, but it seems like it may still be nevertheless possible to provide more than 30 days. So, if you have thoughts on that or reasons why that's not feasible, I think we're willing to listen, but.
And when you say 30 days, what is the 30 days from when? The end of your May contract, or 30 days from when? Because again,
In advance of the layoff.
Of the layoff.
Because then they're getting a contract beginning in August, correct? So the 30 days or 60 days work backwards from that. Because I guess I'm asking because we could find out basically for the legislature, if a session went long, you could find out it's the end of May, we're cutting you back. Administration needs a little time to not knee-jerk react and just say, hey, just cut that. We really need to look at and analyze what these cuts are gonna do. So, we can't just knee-jerk reaction and jump into just saying we're gonna cut and be able to notify everybody right away in all situations. That's what I'm just trying to explain.
So is a concern that session runs long, that pushes back the budget process, and that may be a reason that 60 days is just not.
I mean, the session can extend and go as long as they want. I mean, they can not even agree in the 1 year, and then they went into additional session in July. So, I don't know if it's tied more to the end of session and giving a date time period, but still administration, depending on how bad the cuts could potentially be. I mean, we needed some time to really decide what the impact to the whole organization is, not just try and do it quick and, and just start cutting things.
And I don't think we want you to do that. But yeah, I think
Good point.
we're just trying to whatever we can. 30 days is obviously better than no notice, but if there's any possible way to commit to more than that, I think that we should really try and do that. We've proposed 60, so if you want to think about it, and
Okay, yeah,
that's fine.
we'll discuss that, Brian.
The remainder of your changes to section 1 we were okay with. In section 2, we were okay with kind of the factors you listed there, but we made a couple of changes. We wanted the sort of criteria and how this is put together to be a little bit less squishy than it was in your proposal. We're not, obviously this is a huge movement off of the point system, which provides essentially no flexibility at all. But trying to say, okay, well, this is the factor that's most important, this factor is not as important, this factor is less important. And I don't know that we're trying to create a mathematical formula here or anything. But we've basically said that, okay, these are the criteria from most important to least important. We moved length of service up below qualifications and credentials. In a lot of contracts, you'll see length of service be used as a tiebreaker for when other sort of objective criteria don't fail. So maybe kind of that sort of a concept. And then in service to the college and community, we struck and community. Not that it's not good to provide service to the community, but we just kind of struggled a little bit with what that could mean. I mean, how broad are we thinking of community, and is that really something that's that appropriate to look at when making a reduction in force decision? But at the top of the next page, you'll see we left supervisory recommendation in there. So if there's no clear choice to be made based on all these other criteria, the supervisor can still make some sort of recommendation. And I guess if they want to include service to the community in there, what leads them to their recommendation, they can do that. But we just weren't sure why or what that would look like or what it meant, so we just struck that phrase. But those are the only changes we made to section 2. In section 3, we made kind of largely an editorial change, but I think just kind of makes it clear what our intention is, which is, in a blue collar context, you would kind of recall people based on reverse order of seniority. So kind of trying to take that general concept, people be recalled kind of according to how they shook out on the same criteria that were being used for layoff. Other than that, we can live with all the other changes we made to this article.
6, you guys.
Oh, yes,
didn't
sorry.
accept.
Yeah, sorry. When you reject a change, it doesn't stand out anymore and you overlook it. But yeah, so we kept the salary in. I mean, we heard what you were saying, and of course, if someone's willing to take a lower paid position, I mean, far be it from us to stop them. But had difficulty coming up with situations where someone would be recalled to a comparable position for which they're credentialed and qualified, where there would be a salary difference. That was, we didn't strike it out of opposition to the idea necessarily, we just had issues figuring out when that would actually happen. So I don't know, maybe you have some examples you were thinking of, or that was something we struggled to figure out.
The only one off the top of my head that I don't know that would come up very often is if the salary level changed generally for good or bad, but obviously you'd be more concerned with it going down. So if you're off for 12 months, in the meantime, if you're in a reduction in force scenario, it's not out of the question you may be in salary reduction scenario for those that aren't laid off. And so if you're brought back, maybe language along the lines of what others are being paid might be for that position.
What they would have been
I
paid
don't know,
had they
I've
not
never
been
seen it
laid
come up.
off, or-
Yeah, exactly. So, if your position, everybody in your position also had a lower salary, which again, I don't think I've seen in higher ed, but it's possible. I have seen it in other public entities where in conjunction with a layoff, we've also reduced something. Not salary as much as benefits, but so you don't come back in higher than everybody else because you were in the hill when you come back in where you otherwise would have been, maybe something along those lines.
I think that's reasonable.
But we'll talk about that and see if there's other potential where it could come up, but yeah, I mean, here you're talking about faculty with your ranks and whatnot.
Right.
That's not going to change necessarily by being brought back. So.
Okay, on Article 10, we've just picked out the first couple of sections of it, not because we're proposing to eliminate the others, but because that was really all that kind of needed to be talked about for this purpose. You can see the change we've made. We haven't changed our salary schedule. It doesn't mean we're not willing to consider changes to it, but it is important that there be some sort of salary structure there for a variety of reasons. The change that's been made here is just to make it clear what our proposal is for getting people onto the schedule, and that is just move them on it, don't cut their pay, whatever the lowest amount is that will not result in a pay reduction is what we're proposing there for that. Now I know we talked last time about this, and you said that on your side you had concerns about whether this sets up some sort of expectation of future salary increases. I can understand, especially not having had prior experience with one, how it may appear that way to the college administration, but I think that's not something that's something that's very easy to dispel, even if it ever did come up. I mean, obviously everything's contingent on the budget. Obviously everything's based on what's affordable. It's fairly routine to either give step increases or not give step increases based on what the budget is. I'm not sure that having a salary schedule results in more contentious negotiations at all. And I think you mentioned the Hillsborough example last year. I happened to be a witness in the special magistrate hearing there. So, what happened in Hillsborough is they had their sort of salary schedule. It wasn't these sort of small increases that are associated with, what gets bargained every year. The way it worked in Hillsborough was their employees only got raises every 3 or 4 years. They got huge raises. They got something like $4,000 or $5,000 raises. So, the reason they went to impasse was because a year came up and they said, sorry, we can't afford it. And there was these people who had waited 3 years for their raise. They had gone through no raises and then waited 3 years for a raise. And then it wasn't coming. So you had about a third of the bargaining unit who was very, very, very highly invested in the outcome of this negotiation. And, a lot of people who, may have cared out of some sort of sense of fairness, but weren't really themselves that concerned about it. So it was sort of a unique internal political dynamic there. I'm not sure it's appropriate to extrapolate their very unique salary system that they used to have in Hillsborough to what's here. What's here resembles, something that's common in colleges around the state. It's, until the legislature made it illegal, it was, essentially universal in the K-12 world. And I'm not sure that the concern of making negotiations more contentious in the future is necessarily well-founded.
The response to that I would say is, why do you want it?
Well, one major reason is to prevent wage inversion and wage compression. For instance, if you look at your proposal, which is current policy, but just to give you kind of a concrete example, we have people in this very room who were hired 5-6 years ago and haven't gotten a permanent salary increase. But under your proposal, let's say you've got 2 graduates from, University of Florida. One goes to Hillsborough Community College, one goes to Pasco Hernando State College, and this is 5 years ago. At Hillsborough Community College, Pasco Hernando State College, they've both got 5 years of teaching experience since they graduated. The person from Hillsborough comes to Pasco Hernando now, under your proposal, they would get 2.5%, assuming they had PhDs, they would get 2.5% for those 5 years of experience. Suddenly they're making 12.5% more than the person who's been here the whole time. And I don't think I need to explain why that just doesn't sit well with people. It doesn't seem right. When you have a schedule that very clearly lays out, here's how everyone is treated according to their experience, whether it was accrued here or whether it was accrued elsewhere. That issue is technically it's prevented, and then also people just look at that and they can know and have confidence that they're being treated fairly. That's probably the most, that's probably the biggest reason, just from a sort of basic fairness standpoint. Biggest benefit to a salary schedule is it just prevents those types of issues out of the gate.
How would that work if I was a faculty and I was employed here for 10 years, but we didn't give raises for 10 years? So I go look at the scale and say I should be making this at 10. Now you hire somebody in from Hillsborough that's 10 years and says, well, I'm supposed to get what it says for the 10 years.
Yeah, so if you look at Part B, and this was from our original proposal, it says that actually it might be back on the first page. If it's not in here, it should be, and if that's part of what's causing consternation, I apologize for that, but
Are you looking at D? Under no circumstances shall a newly hired faculty member be placed on a higher step than a current faculty member with equivalent credentials and experience?
yes, that is what I'm looking for. Yeah, so if a person comes in, then maybe we place
D
the
isn't
people.
on here.
Oh, D's not here. Okay.
No, I think.
It's on the previous page, at the bottom of the previous page.
10-1D.
So maybe people who have
Oh, I see.
people who have 10 years of experience. I assume they're gonna if they have the same academic degrees, they're gonna generally be in the same area. Maybe they go to step 6 or whatever because that's the lowest step that doesn't result in a pay increase. Well, then the person coming in with 10 years of experience, they would go to step 6. We arrange it this way just because we don't have the information that will show us exactly what step would be most appropriate for people by year of experience. I think we requested, Caitlin, correct if I'm wrong, we requested information about prior experience, and that wasn't something that existed. There wasn't like a nice.
So we have all the hire dates and all the masters plus, but not plus 15 or plus 30 PhD. But I was told that we don't have any information on how many years of experience each faculty member was credited when they were hired. So if I came in when I was hired 11 years ago, and I got 3 years of teaching experience. They don't have any record that that was why I got that salary, is what I was told. That information is not available.
The system doesn't track that. Our
Right.
newer system we go to will.
Right.
But I think they'd have to go back to the manual
Every
records.
every personnel record, yes.
Yeah, that should be enumerated in the letter of offer
Okay,
that
but
the
it's-
president sent to the faculty member.
But you have to go to back to
Correct,
each
correct.
personnel file,
It's not in the
Right,
database,
okay.
yeah.
And also the
But
information I
that
got
information
didn't
doesn't
distinguish
exist.
between masters plus 15 and masters plus 30. The database that or the information I got didn't distinguish between those two.
Is there any way to distinguish between those two?
I'm not sure on that again.
It just
If
said
the
2
system
plus.
is limited on that field, or?
It said 2 plus, it didn't say 2 plus 15 or 2 plus 30, and I asked about it, and I don't think they had that information.
Anyway, if we were able to get all of that information, we would be happy to bring forward a proposal that said, okay, step 1, years 0 to 3, step 2, years 4 to 5. I mean, you see that all the time in the K-12 contracts. It'll have a placement schedule and say, well, if you have this many years of experience, you go on this step. And it applies to the current employees and the new employees coming in. But just, having something people can look at and be assured that they are being treated fairly with respect to new veteran employees, that there's no, differentiation there is a very important thing for current faculty, and I think something that, ultimately new faculty would appreciate as well.
Quick question. If the example you gave in response to Brian's question about why the necessity for the actual base salary schedule, and you express exactly the scenario that's enumerated, articulated in under letter D, with that a newly hired faculty member comes in compared to an existing veteran faculty member, and they're getting equivalent credentials, equivalent experience, and they're getting a better salary. Would this statement satisfy your concern without having to resort to the table of a base salary schedule? If that's the premise of the argument, if we were to, as part of the negotiation, accept that we may concur that we have to exercise a change in process of policy regarding how we bring in new people compared to our existing individuals, if this is what you're proffering to us to accept, would that not satisfy your concerns without having to resort to the actual table with the mathematics?
How would we know?
Right, well,
How would we
there's,
know?
It
That would become college policy, no?
But how would we know if we wouldn't know what they were making? In other words, this is more transparent.
Even an example here, I guess, I just try and walk them the table. So say I did have 5 years' experience, you hire me at 5 years at the entry grade of 39,000. But I work here 5 more years, so I have 10 years' experience, so I should be making 45, but we didn't get any raises for 5 years. Now, you go hire somebody from outside, and we're posting it, and they say, okay, well, salary scales, I've got 10 years'
Mhm.
experience, they're gonna equate me to 10. I'm gonna be at 45, but you just said, which I understand, oh, no, I can't pay you. I can only pay you 39 because I don't wanna pass up the person who's got experience here and I wasn't able to pay them. And how isn't that gonna get confusing also to the person coming from outside? Well, what really is the pay scale? And again, I understand what you're saying, if somebody's here and you're not getting the increases, you want somebody coming in and get credit for increases you didn't get. I understand that, but
yeah,
it seems like when you come to the table, it might be a little confusing. Maybe there's another way for us to look that in every time when you come and evaluate and do that evaluation across the table.
So, ultimately, the way this needs to look in the end is it needs to reflect reality, which is people making this amount, have this range of experience, people with this range of experience make this amount, so that we don't have that issue in the future. This isn't a final proposal, this is just, let's talk about a salary structure. If the issue is, new people being confused or not feeling like they're getting what this says, ultimately this needs to reflect the reality, and I think we can get there if we get, information sufficient to do that. Did you want to?
Yeah. Quick comment though, can't you limit how someone comes in, like, say that someone is at HCC and say, well, I've been there for 10, but I'm would like to come in,
Mhm.
but can't you limit and say, no, you can only claim up to 5 years of experience?
But that's what we already do.
Yeah.
For each
I mean, you
grade
can- I
category,
mean,
we
you
do a
can
certain
cap.
amount of years times the percentage.
Right, but I mean, you could cap it though,
Mhm.
too.
Mhm.
They do, they kept it at 8.
Oh, okay. Oh,
It's
okay,
kept
they
at
already,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I was mixed up because some.
Yeah, each is at
because I
8,
looked
and
at
each
so-
percentage is a different.
I looked at so many of
percentage.
these things, that, you know, I know that Polk, I think, goes up to 10, I think HCC goes up to 4. Yeah, so I mean, I looked at so many different ones.
I believe we cap at 8, is that correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, well, okay.
Just call me on my fax
Mhm.
Yeah, it's 8.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, I came into this obviously after the whole unionization thing happened, but I mean, from what I understand, the reason that faculty felt it was necessary to form a union was there used to be some sort of, you know, expectation that after so many years you got the longevity increase, is that what they're called? And then that was unaffordable, policy went away, and you know, it wasn't the amount of raise that people were getting that caused them to unionize. It was that issue. It was the sort of just the idea of having any sort of structure that governs how salary works was done away with, and then here we are.
That also includes the doing away with the salary increase for getting advanced degrees. We used to get a salary increase that was part of your salary then. Now we switched to you get a one-time.
One time.
That didn't go well.
But in most cases, though, the person does move up, and there is a permanent component. Because with the increase, majority of the people are actually being moved up a scale, they're not meeting the minimum. They're getting a permanent increase, plus they're getting the other amount as a one-time bonus. So
That one-time bonus doesn't add into your retirement
Right.
or anything like that, so it's not continuing on. So when I got my doctorate degree, I got a raise,
Mhm.
and then that was added into my salary for the rest of the time I'm here. And so if I look at someone today getting a doctorate like I did, they're not going to be making the same money at, what is it, 20 years I've been here now. 20 years, they're not going to be making the same money that I'm making because I got that raise. It was a permanent raise rather than that one time.
It turned out to about 50% of it's permanent now compared to what used to be. Because before, if you calculated the average person would move up a grade, they weren't at the minimum of that salary grade, therefore they do get a permanent increase. So that when you translate out for most people, it ends up being they get 50% of what they used to get before, but then they got the non-reoccurring also as the bonus of trying to provide a little bit of an offset for that change.
But that's not a guarantee. The thing is that Wes Johnson is who I'm talking about specifically. He is making $44,000 now. He's working on his doctorate. He's going to get his doctorate. He's going to get the one time, but that doesn't go into his salary for the rest of the time he's here. So he oh yeah, I'm getting that one time. It's great, but he's looking at 5 years from now. If we don't get a permanent raise, I may still be making $44,000. There has to be some incentive to keep qualified, good faculty. And right now, the 2% is nice. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to turn down the 2% non-reoccurring, but that's not an incentive for someone to stay, especially these young faculty members. The older ones like me, we're going to stay around. Partly because I enjoyed the benefit of getting that salary increase, but there needs to be some incentive. Right now, I don't see that the college is providing enough incentive for somebody like Wes Johnson. Once he gets his doctorate, he's going to go someplace else. So we become a training ground for these people to then give them to some other university or college as a qualified, great faculty member that we've lost because we couldn't keep them because there's not an incentive. I think that's where all this comes from.
Well, part of your challenge within that too, as we showed last time, with longevities and degrees, every year we're adding $200,000 to the budget. After 5 years, there's $1 million more in the budget to sustain salaries that we're not getting the money for. Now, if we treat it as non-recurring, you always have that pool in there, and everybody's, when their cycle comes around, they at least get a portion of that.
But
If
that's
you
great
don't,
if you
where
can do
you-
that year to year.
I understand, but where do you find the $1 million to cover those increased costs besides possibly reduce workforce, which then reduces opportunity, which then possibly gets into layoffs of existing faculty? So again, there's that morale issue on that side, you know. Can I give you a raise? Maybe not, something recurring, but sustain your job. In the greatest world, like you said, we want to keep people progressing, but the funding hasn't allowed us to do that.
Well, I'm not a budget person, first of all. Math's not my thing. That's why I became a psychologist. It's just, math is something.
Psychology's all math.
Well, I
statistics.
know. I do statistics. It's the other math. It's when
Right,
they get
Fred?
in accounting and stuff. I don't know what it
If you
is.
think about
But
our budget,
English,
I mean, if you think
no
about it,
math.
look at our budget, if we did that, and it kind of proves that over the last 5 years, we would add $1 million less in our budget. How would we have balanced the budget with $1 million less? We would have to most likely eliminate positions. And eliminate positions where? You know, it'd be across the board, but then how do we continue to maintain the service instructional to the students all the way around? I mean, that's the hard economic challenge we have.
I understand that budget thing, and I understand wants to say something, but a couple years ago, we looked at the issue of the people that would have gotten an advanced degree salary increase. It would have cost the college $80,000. Okay? Then you have to cover that $80,000 next year,
Mhm.
but it's not millions. It's I could tell you a few places you could save some money right now to get that $80,000.
There's
Well,
Dr.
remember, it's 80 times and you go so many years out, that keeps being.
Okay, I
multiplied
understand that.
out.
I understand that. But right now there's no incentive, and so I'm telling you, from what I'm hearing, is there's people going to leave, qualified people.
Gary.
Yeah, thank you. So Gary, I wanted to further address your comment, and I know that you used Wes Johnson as an example. I'm not going to say the faculty's name. She's no longer here at the college. She went back to private industry. But we had a faculty person that after the IMMs changed, she earned her master's plus 15. So she got the one-time incentive, right? Okay, but what she got was a permanent salary adjustment because she moved up to the next classification. Same thing's going to happen with Wes Johnson when he gets his doctorate. Only faculty at this college have that incentive. No other staff, no administration has that. But you guys, when you move up in the rank because of the increased academic credential, if you're not already above the minimum of the next level, you're automatically going to be adjusted to the minimum of that next level. That is a permanent salary increase.
Okay, but it's still not going to be the same amount of
It's
money
not
that I
going to
was
be the same
making.
as 5,000, but it may be 2,000.
Well, it was actually more than 5,000 when I got my doctorate.
But it is a permanent raise.
But it's still not.
That's not offered to anybody else at the college.
I understand that, and I'm going to shut up because I don't think we're going to be able. We're going to agree to disagree on this. I just think that that's an important issue that across the board, if you can't keep these people, you're not going to have a quality institution, and that's what we all want. And so we need to do something to have some incentive for these people to stay. And I understand what you're saying. Yes, I agree. They do get that. But when everybody was getting this fixed salary increase and then you yank it out and then you yank out other things, that's why there was discontent. That's why we're sitting at this table today. That's what we all need to come, and that's why we're here. We want to work this out together
Can I
to
also
come to
s-
some solution to that.
Can I also say that there's also no incentive to actually get a PhD? To put in that kind of work for a one-time bonus is like, why?
Again, by the time, if you
you
work
know.
your way through the PhD, you're working up each level to pay grade, so there is gonna be a recurring increase. Again, it'll be 50% of what it used to be, but then you'll also get the bonuses along the way, plus the college is also contributing to tuition reimbursement to help you. I know it's not covered in a large share of it, but it's contributing.
True, but when you
Again,
balance
I
it
go
all
back
out,
to the
you're
same
like,
old option, when you look at the
okay.
numbers, unfortunately, if we took the other scenario, I'd be eliminating 5 positions every year for the last 5 years to balance it. So, that's the economic challenge. I mean, we agree we agree with everything you say from that perspective, I think. You know, we all want to better our employees, give them the opportunity to keep increasing the wages and benefit and compensation. It's just the state funding hasn't allowed us to do that properly.
The last thing I just want to say, I guess part of the issue was that when somebody like Wes Johnson, and he allowed me to use his name, got hired, we were under the old policy. And so he's thinking, hey, I can look forward to this salary increase. And then all of a sudden the IMM was changed and no, we're not doing that anymore. That's where it really,
We
That's really
grandfather
what hurt.
people in who are currently in a program. I think they had 3 or 4 years to finish it. So there are still people, when we give out the awards, are still getting it as their permanent base the last couple of years because they were grandfathered in. So only people who started a program after that point went under the new rule.
okay.
Because for that exact purpose. We wanted, if they were already started with good faith, working on it, we were gonna cover that obligation.
Graham,
Well, to just kind of bring it back to sort of the original point here, I mean, the stated concern was not wanting to set up a system where people expect raises and then are frustrated when they don't happen. And, you know, again, I think I would just go back to the recent history of the institution of the last few years. You know, for how long, 5, 6 years? There haven't been permanent raises, and, you know, faculty, accepted that.
One
Last
in
year,
7
probably.
years.
I don't think it's 7.
You know, I mean, nobody
Just
likes
about.
that. You know,
My
I mean,
salary hasn't moved
no one
in
likes
7
that.
years.
We're with you on that one.
Yeah, and I mean, nobody likes that, but, you know, people can be persuaded to understand that that's the reality and they can live with it. It wasn't that caused unionization. It was taking away the structure for how raises might work in the future.
Alright, so on that point, then why wouldn't this be setting up the exact same scenario? We're putting the structure in place, and if things come to pass, what Brian says, we don't have the money, then we're back at everybody's disgruntled, because whether you were hired under that or expectations.
Well, what I'm saying is there was structure in place before. There were no raises sometimes. People,
And I think
People live with
when we
that.
look at longevity, I can have Jarrell do a study on that too. I think longevities, we were one of the only schools in the whole state that was doing that. I think Lake Sumter was doing it, but it's $200, not $1,000, not the $1,500.
yeah, most
Other
people,
ones-
most
So they
people
have
do
a
this.
schedule.
Other ones with degree
Yeah.
attainments, the degree attainments, they're, I think, not even a third of what we're doing. So by still you moving up in the scale, your permanent increase is larger than what the other schools are getting. Again, I'll run this, have do a survey again on that, we can look at those numbers, because those are things we continue to look at.
Anyway, to finish the thought, you know, I mean, there was structure before. Sometimes there weren't raises. That didn't cause people to unionize. What caused people to unionize was losing the structure. The structure is I would say, even more important than the raises. When we did our surveys of what's the important issues, yeah, I mean, we heard people say they don't get paid enough, but overwhelmingly, it was these other structural issues that people were more concerned about than the amounts themselves.
So the other
The
psychological
structure is
side
still
to
there.
that.
Right.
What's not there
The
is the
psychological
follow-through.
side to that is, are you willing to get a longevity every year for $1,000, knowing that 5 other people are going to be laid off?
Again,
And that,
think
if
we
that
need to
doesn't,
make
that
that
doesn't
choice,
affect your
though, at this
department.
point.
No, I mean, logically, at some point, even on the administrative side, if I look at it and say, okay, everybody in my staff at a certain point gets $1,000. Great, why they're getting 1,000, but at some point, you come around to my department and tell me I need to eliminate somebody. So is everybody excited they got $1,000 over the year, but now they need to have more work because the work has to get done? I mean,
No,
that's a
Now, what was the
philosophical.
tuition increase that was
Well,
necessary? Or did
let's
any
not
of
talk
this
about
happen?
tuition. Let's not talk about tuition. We had that conversation last time.
Well, we can talk about that.
The-
I can give you an update on that.
Well, again, the hypothetical you're proposing assumes that this necessitates raises every year, which it doesn't. I mean, if the college, if this were to exist and the college comes and says, yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we gave you a step, but we can't do that unless we cut 4 positions, then, you know, I think it's safe to say that most union bargaining teams would rather not take a pay increase for a year than see 4 or 5 of their colleagues have to be shown the door. I mean, I'm almost at the point where I'm not sure what else to say. I mean, there was structure before. Sometimes there were no raises. That was fine. It was the structure that ultimately proved to be the most important thing. So if we have the structure now and don't get raises under it, that's still something I think, you know, assuming the college puts on a reasonable case for why it can't afford it, is not going to be more contentious than continuing to not have a structure is. I mean, if there's no structure, this is just going to dominate negotiations for the next 10, 20 years.
Now, if you have the structure, then the structure kind of implies that you gotta try and catch up the structure. So if you didn't give raises for three years, so example, the last, if you look at your table, I think it's going up 3% every year. So you 3, for the last 3 years, you say, my expectation, I'm gonna get a 9% raise over 3 years. Well, we only had 1 year. Last year, we had a 2%. So I'm thinking to myself, somewhere, you know, according to the scale, you owe me 7%. But the likelihood of the college ever getting enough money to make up the 7% is probably 0 to nil. So then does that create ill will, thinking, well, you're promising me to get to this place on the schedule that I can't ever guarantee that I can get?
There are plenty of school districts where after the recession, no one got raises for 5, 6 years. There's school districts in the Panhandle that their step schedule, no one's moved in 10 years. I mean, it sucks, but is it more contentious because there's a step system in the first place? I don't think so. I don't think anyone on the union or the management side would say that.
The question, Graham, is would it have been as contentious had we still had the step system but been obligated to make those two dramatic changes as an institution because of the budgetary crisis, literally, right? And to Brian's point, by reducing longevity and having a one-time longevity stipend, and then by reducing the rolling into the base of the degree attainment and just having it a one time. I mean, even if we were to have had that, if that decision had to have been made at the time, the level of contentiousness would most assuredly still been there, no? So we just have to make sure that you're absolutely correct. Every faculty member that I spoke with talked about the level of support, the level of a focus of enjoying being at the institution, the support that they felt they had from the administration, but those two changes were the predicate for the unionization. We recognize that. There was a significant internal debate when this was voted on administratively, because we recognized that this was a very difficult, painful decision to make on the part of the institution. It wasn't done haphazardly. I will also say that when we have at our budget hearings, you know, faculty, I mean, you're not privy to the detailed, very painstaking, exacting debates that go on regarding each of our units and the advocacy for the academic side, and how many faculty do we need, and if we don't hire another faculty member, how much more pressure does it put on the existing faculty, and how many more adjuncts do we have, can we continue to absorb? These discussions are consistently made, and they're very painful to undergo. And I mean, you don't see that, you don't have the bird's eye perspective, but we entertain all of the concerns that you have already, you know. So you know, the word contentiousness is you know, that you know, we recognize it, we empathize. It doesn't have to be contentious. Likewise, Gary, you know, you're right. You know, there are significant changes, but there's that notion out there that somehow PHSC, you know, less of a quality institution, so therefore I'll go somewhere else and I'll be absorbed very easily to another institution, as if this college is just sort of you know, an afterthought, a fly-by-night, you know, with that level of honor and appreciation to work and to focus on our students and to live the mission, I think is important. And at some point, you know, I came in with a doctorate in 1994. I earned my doctorate in 94. I was hired in 97 as a faculty member. And you're right, I had a wealth of experience, but it was not taken into consideration when I came in. But at some point, we also have to talk about other variables beyond compensation, other variables that are more intrinsic. So to your point, Caitlin, why earn the doctorate? Well, I can tell you multiple reasons of how enriching it is to be in the doctoral program, right? And knowing that you're not going to recoup the cost, perhaps. So those are some other, I think, more contextual issues we have to think about when we're dialoguing about this. Back to my point, had we had something like this, would that have made a difference if the decision had been made to pull the plug on those two existing benefits? I'm not sure if it would have.
Dr. Dr. Gina?
Yes.
I think a lot, or at least part of it, is communication. So if we have this salary schedule and we make it very clear that this is our aspiration, I guess, and then we make it very clear also that this is contingent on budget, that creates a different kind of expectation. The other issue is you say we're not privy to your budget discussions. I asked to go to the budget hearings and I was told I was not invited, or basically I wasn't allowed to go to the budget hearings. So perhaps if faculty are privy to those conversations, that also might change some of the perceptions and some of our emotions about the budget. If we have more transparency about why these decisions are being made, we might be more sympathetic to the actual decisions.
But that happens at the budget,
Hearings.
no, at the budget process when the president and the vice president go around the campuses to talk about why those decisions are made. Because
Right.
at those budget hearings, there's a lot of confidential information
Okay.
disclosed about individuals. When we talk
Okay.
about upgrades and
Mhm.
so that might not be the best place for you to see that level of transparency.
Okay.
If we're not doing an effective job in articulating some of those, the painful challenges, and I use that word pain very literally, that we have to undergo, then we can continue to improve upon that. There's not a problem there.
Yeah, I think that is an issue. A lot of faculty don't know why we haven't raised tuition in 8 years. We know we haven't raised tuition, but we don't really know the backstory. And it frustrates people, well, why can't we raise tuition? Because they don't know the backstory. You know, they don't know how much control we have over our revenue, which is essentially zero, right?
Right.
They don't, you know, so there's frustration, and a lot of it comes from a lack of understanding, coming from a lack of communication.
Appreciate your
That
perspective.
is true.
Yeah.
Well, again, as requested, we videotape the presentation.
But I didn't even know that. I went to the budget hearings. I didn't even, or
Right,
budget
you don't.
presentations. I had no idea that they were. Did any of the other faculty know that they were recorded?
The
No.
original one here was taped,
Okay, I didn't know
and we
yet.
put it on the website, and we notified everybody on the website, internal website.
I never. I mean, I'm sure not the only one that rarely checks the intranet. So if that link had been emailed out, that would have been very helpful. That everyone would know that this is exactly where I go and this is available. So it's just
Well, I
like
know-
little things
yeah.
like that would I
Well,
think would actually really help.
We enterprise mailed everybody that the meetings were being held.
Right, but not the link to the video. I don't think that I'm aware of. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Can I just clarify one thing, Brian? You were talking about before that if somebody earned an additional degree or hours, they would go into that next salary step. Okay, what about that new PhD that comes here? Without that longevity being added to the salary, that PhD student that's, or faculty member that starts with a doctorate doesn't ever move, because there is no next salary step. Okay, so what works for these people to encourage them to earn advanced degrees, there's no encouragement for that person that starts with a PhD to go forward. Yes.
They start at a higher level though.
Right, but he's saying that if you start at a higher level, but it's still stagnant. And you can't climb out of that level, so it's still very stagnant. You started at a higher salary grade, but you don't have a choice to try to earn another one because you're starting at that one. Whereas somebody who came here with just a master's could say, oh yeah, if, I could not only increase my salary by earning an additional degree plus the longevity, the only thing to keep that PhD person was really the fact that, after 5 years, I have this added to my salary, even if we have no raises. So the PhD is stuck if we hire them in with that degree level.
Well, I mean, the only solution with that would be the step system.
Or come back to putting that longevity type
Yeah.
back in salaries.
Which would be part of the step system. Yeah.
But then again, the very simple, abstruse comment is, where will we get the money? From where, when we froze positions, again, how difficult that decision. We saw the immediate ramifications of having to freeze faculty positions, right? We saw a significant plummeting of our FTE because we could not have additional sections. We couldn't have more nurses. Because of the decision. So do you lay people off, or do you just take existing positions that are vacant and not hire until further notice, until the salary, until the budget improves, right? None of us wants to undergo the ramifications of the outcomes of freezing positions, but we have. But because of that, we were able to salvage positions. So again, those are the trade-offs. That's the true wrestling that we have to undergo when we're making these decisions, and it's not as easy as saying, just infuse all this money into the salaries.
And, we talked about last time, the insurance increases the college coverage
Right.
by $500,000 over 2 years. We could have just said, okay, employees, you start paying. So do we start doing that, so then we give people longevities, but then everybody else starts paying the price of the insurance? So, there's all these things moving around, these costs going up, and our revenue stagnant. So we try and look at the full compensation package of everything included. And you can look at it 100 different ways and always think there's probably a better way to do it, but we try to do the best we can and try and be fair and equal across the board.
So I think part of that is actually just having this conversation, because I don't think it's really
Or
been
even
done
that,
before.
remember when we used to get the letter every year from HR that would state what the college paid for insurance, and it was very clear, we used to get one every August, do you guys remember that?
I
We
believe,
haven't
I
seen
think
that
that-
in years.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
it
your
was
salary,
really great.
your benefits.
Right, it was a
I think
great, so that
he
it
just
kind of
did
put
it.
Yeah,
everything in
he's
perspective.
doing one right now. Darrell's doing it
Okay.
right now. I think it's been about a year or two since we've done them.
Yeah, it's been a few years.
And then we're also,
Those were
once we
helpful.
get the new system, it'll actually be built in the system, so you go to a certain screen. Because there is a screen in the system now where you can go into and you can see your salary history, but again, it doesn't have the benefit
Mhm.
contribution.
That's, so you can compare what the college does have to pay for those benefits.
It listed out in my benefits. It
But
listed
you have to,
out.
I think you have to look each benefit up individually.
It's there.
It'll show college
shows it.
paid.
Mhm.
But again, people probably don't know that.
I like the word that Caitlin used, aspirational, for this. I mean, the way people feel now, and I saw the, communications from Mr. Johnson that Gary was referring to, and the sense that you get from that, as well as from just talking to faculty members in meetings, is that, we hear it, that, we'd like to pay people better, but it's just not possible. When there isn't a reward for being here for any length of time, there isn't a permanent reward for advanced degrees. People feel like there just isn't. It's just okay. Well, if everybody gets a raise, then I get a raise. But there's no reward for any other aspect of being a faculty member. And just having something that people can look at, even if it is purely aspirational, even if it's not binding, and it just says here's what we do. It shows people that there's at least a mutual interest and intent to try and reward people for their degrees, going across the grades, and their service to the college, going up the steps. And I think that on its own, I think a lot of people find an intangible value to that, even if it's not something that's able to be increased every year. I think you can see it's something that's very, very, very important to the faculty, if nothing else. I think, we can find ways to do it. Hopefully, once we get information, if there's any way to get information showing experience, maybe that's, pulling out people's personnel files might be a pain, but if we can at least get information that differentiates between 2+15 and 2+30 and can start looking at costs associated with moving people onto a schedule, I'm sure it can be done at negligible cost. This kind of thing happens from time to time. People get moved onto schedules for the first time, or they switch schedules entirely. It's something that can be done at a minimal cost to just sort of set it up, minimal startup cost, if you will. And then, you know, year over year, we can have these frank discussions about, well, insurance went up, FRS went up, you know, the cost, what you're asking for is the cost of 4 positions. Would you rather have raises than not have any layoffs? I mean, these are all conversations we can have, and the, you know, value of labor relations is having those out in the open with, you know, an intermediary between the college and the faculty who can then go and try and explain some of the decision-making behind the faculty, that piece that, as Caitlin expressed, some faculty feel like has been kind of missing.
A phrase that is coming to mind for me is, it represents like a philosophical infrastructure that clearly the faculty of, you know, whether it's, you know, real or perceived, but that lack of value, even though that's not the intent of these difficult decisions budgetarily that you've had to make. So having the structure, you know, there's not a monetized thing that you could attach to it, but this step type of schedule represents a philosophical structure that would enable us to have more of these discussions, enable us to say, okay, we're confident that you know, faculty representing the quality academics that are going forward, trying to draw in new faculty, retaining the faculty that are quality that we have. And so it really is as if at one of our faculty senate meetings, we're talking with Dr. Beard about infrastructure, and that, you know, the infrastructure of the bridge, if it's not cared for, that bridge collapses. And so this is an infrastructure that is philosophical, if that makes sense, so that if you don't visually have something on paper that's helping us to feel upheld, even though it's not that specific, it's going to have to be dependent upon every year's situation that we're put in based on what the state is doing. And I think that's what we're hoping to come to, is to have this understanding that we need that boost. We need that boost in the value of what we're representing and what we're bringing to the table for the college. If that makes sense, but.
Okay, so we kind of asked it, but just want to see is do you guys know if is that something we can get a list of the faculty with the salaries and hire dates and all that differentiates between people who are on 2+15 and 2+30?
Yeah, probably on the system, it'd have to be done manually.
And the experience credited.
Sorry?
And the experience credited at higher date, we need that.
Yeah, I think we know that would have to be done manually.
Yeah.
Is that, how feasible is it, or how much time would it take to get that? Because I mean, if we have that, happy to try and work up something where the cost is totally minimal, but can't attempt that without that information.
I mean, I'm not really sure. I'd have to check with Darrell and his staff to see how involved that would be.
Okay.
I mean, it can be done, it's just a matter of how long it's going to take.
Right.
We have to follow up with you. Darrell's usually here, but he's not
Right.
here today.
Okay, yeah, whenever he gets a chance, we can talk more about that. Okay, proceeding kind of down the line, again, as a package, we're willing to agree to Article 11 as proposed by the administration today. You know, there is of course, as we kind of talked about, a very significant waiver in there, you know, granting the college the sort of unilateral authority to make changes within the consortium or make the decision to leave the consortium altogether. But in order to achieve some of our top priorities here, that's discretion where we would be comfortable granting. On Article 12, we you know, we put that our position is kind of our original proposal. Obviously, we're willing to talk about it more, and entertain counters on that, but we do want, that is an important issue to us that we'd like to put into this recipe here. And then finally, on right to privacy, 14.3, we've accepted your language almost in its entirety. We've made a couple editorial changes. The one thing we added was, you know, drug testing that's, you know, with some exceptions, such as obviously the reasonable suspicion drug testing. Drug testing is a mandatory subject to bargaining, so we just want to make it clear that that's something that would be bargained before implementation. But otherwise, we were fine with your language changes there.
We did discuss Article 12, continuing contract promotion and rank. I went back and looked through. I think we had proposed something the same day, the first day, on rank. You guys had your Article 12 covering those 3 topics, and I don't think we've had really anything back and forth since then. So we pulled that up, kind of look at it, and our suggestion is to maybe put that on the agenda for the next meeting, because candidly, the academic side want to take a look at it and go through it. I did a quick glance over and compared. I don't know that there's a lot of sticking points on that, so I'm cautiously optimistic. We're a little bit concerned about the union's proposal on the continuing contract process not being, maybe needing a little more flexibility, timelines and things, but nothing that we thought was insurmountable. But we need to look at it, something that they have, we can't do justice in an hour, basically. But maybe commit to coming back. So I think our next meeting is two weeks from today, again, on the package proposal from the union. Today, we can continue to discuss that, I think, in a couple weeks from now. I see the sticking point being this discussion we're having over the STEP proposal, and to some extent the discipline.
Oh, all right, reminds me. I took the liberty of, well, I thought we were waiting for you to come back, but you were waiting for us to come back to look at some other state and community college contracts on discipline. Just pulled out their language. As far as I could tell, having, you know, the just cause standard and it being subject to arbitration is pretty universal. But, you know, in the 10 minutes or so that I could quickly dig up and copy paste some things, I went ahead and did that, and I'll send you this electronically if you like as well with our the rest of our proposals. It was rare to see, well, I wouldn't say rare, but it was not common to see a whole article with fully fleshed out procedures on discipline. But just about everyone that I looked at had, which was, I think I got them all. There may be one or two missing, but I think I got them all the unionized colleges in the state. They all have that, you know, discipline for just cause type of language in it, and no exclusion as far as I could tell of it being subject to the grievance procedure.
I know we've had this discussion, I think, here before, but so keep coming back to if you want the just cause, why the need for continuing contract to begin with.
Right, and I think my response to that was from what it appears, I mean, feel free to look through the full contracts if you like to verify, but from as far as I can tell, and this is also what my predecessor and other colleagues tell me, that in college contracts, the notion of having a continuing contract essentially means that you have the right to discipline only for cause. So for the first, 5 years, you can of course be released at the end of the year. You have an annual contract. But after that, what it means to have continuing contract is that, discipline termination, namely, is for cause.
Right, so how is that different than what you want a just cause? You can only terminate continuing contract for just cause, and that's what I'm saying, is that what you already have with continuing contract?
Well, I think the difference, of course, is who's making that determination in the end.
Well,
Under the union contracts, it's a binding decision from a neutral third party, as opposed to either the board having the hearing and making the decision, or the board getting a recommendation from an administrative law judge and ultimately making the decision.
right, well, if that's the issue, then that's, to me, not necessarily an insurmountable issue. For example, if the board, yes, in continuing contract has final decision-making authority, but is not without constraint. An administrative law judge hears it, makes factual findings, whatnot, the board's stuck with that. If the concern is whether your board can overrule conclusions of law, that's only recommended from the administrative law judge, then that's something that negotiations may be able to flesh out, but that's a lot different saying we'll just put it all in the hands of a third-party arbitrator, which is much more variable results, more volatile. Something we're trying to avoid.
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with your characterization.
I'm not shocked, but
I mean, I think, this is just standard. This is just the way it's done in all the other union contracts, college and otherwise, university even. And not something I've heard a whole lot of hand-wringing or regret about, ever. You win some, you lose some, but
yeah, I understand that. No one's ever been able to articulate a very good reason to me personally, but other than it's what everybody does, but I never really found that to be particularly persuasive. Not against you guys.
No, I mean, I can tell you that one of my predecessors, who had negotiated college contracts at a couple other colleges recently, said that he had actually received excitement from the management side about being able to get the board out of what they saw as political decision-making altogether.
Yeah, there's some
I don't know how this
value to
board,
that, I think.
I don't know how this board feels, but I can give you I've heard of at least 2 other boards who are like, yeah, we don't want anything to do with that.
I think that's a sentiment I generally agree with. Your boards typically would rather not get involved. But it's a little bit different saying we want to turn it over to a third-party arbitrator to make the final decision. And the current system says you go to administrative law judge, maybe the board make final decision, but they don't have to be all that involved. They just sign off on the recommendation from administrative law judge. So to me, if it's the process, having hearings, having the burden on the college to prove the cause, you already have that. And the difference, and again, I realize this is a difference of opinion, but administrative law judge who's employed by the state is less volatile, less variable. They will follow. There's a whole case law about terminating people on continuing contract, and they'll look to that. Arbitrators don't. So to me, it's a crapshoot. You roll the dice, you get an arbitrator. Some are fairly employer friendly. We love when we get those, and some are union friendly, and some you just never know. And you do win some and lose some. And same under ALJ, they win some and lose some, but you generally follow precedent, and I think both sides are better off for that. That's just
I
my
think we understand each
opinion, because I know I'm not going to convince you on that. So, but it is the sticking point, and whether or not it's enough of a sticking point to hold up an agreement, I don't think we're ready to say that. But in terms of the package of our competing packages, I think that is the sticking point, And we do recognize the value in your willingness to consider the language we have for the Article 11 benefit side. And the other sticking point is the step plan scenario, so we'll need to talk further about that, I think. But I'll be candid with you, I'm not totally optimistic that we'll bridge that gap anytime soon, based upon discussions we've already had. But we'll revisit it with the recent discussions. You guys have any comments to whether for next meeting? I don't know if we have a whole lot else today, unless you guys have others. We don't have anything else. Is there anything else that we want to? I don't want to bite off more than we can chew because we still have a lot of these things.
Right, well, yeah, I mean, I think you've got these in your report. I don't recall whether we have anything in ours or not.
The only other thing that for the next meeting is trying to figure out what, foreshadow a little bit, if we don't reach an agreement on a package of these things that we can TA for the long haul, where do we go with regard to the compensation and benefits for this coming year? And I don't know if you guys have talked about that, what your position is. We have been having discussions on our side, and I don't know that we have a consensus yet on whether or not we would go forward with the non-recurring salary distribution for faculty, or wait and still work on it as part of this process, but which might mean you get it later than everybody else, or whether just to go forward and implement it. That's the only other issue I think that is more pressing.
Does it have to be a package deal, though? If we take the 2% non-reoccurring, we also have to agree to the rest of the compensation package right now? Or can we do a mutual understanding on the 2%, but continue our discussions on the rest of the compensation package for this year? Because I thought I heard you earlier, and I may be wrong, but I thought I heard you say it's like a package deal.
The package really in my mind is that with the benefits, the part of it, and I think where you're going with it, I don't think we have any problem with continuing to have discussion on all the rest of the compensation issues. And I would expect, whether we agreed to an MOU or not, that the rest of the negotiation, in the large part, are going to center around those kinds of things. So we're not trying to take it off the table for future years, but the package really was on the benefit side. We want you to also agree that the benefits to the waiver part of it, where we have the right to change, recognizing that too will be continued to discuss and can be changed by the parties. Where the reason we want that, candidly, I'm sure if Graham has referenced, is we want it just to be clear that as we're going forward and working with the consortium and whatnot, we have the ability to make changes down there. I hope we are finished with all this stuff before any of that kind of thing happens, but I don't know that that'll be the case. And we don't want to have to hold up and delay or figure out what we're doing while that process is ongoing. But no doubt the final agreement, whatever we end up with, will have different compensation and benefit, whether wholesale or tweaks. I'm sure just because of the passage of time, we're going to have different, and we'll continue to discuss that. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm trying to do it with
kind of, sort of,
be as transparent as we can.
No,
But that's the kind of the quid pro quo.
Okay.
And to be also quite candid, we think, my position anyway, is that we have currently the ability to change some of the insurance as part of it. That's what we view our status quo. Now, I would think Union might say, I don't know, we don't agree with that characterization of what the status quo is. And so that's part of why we're trying to do it as an MOU. Let's put it down there, let's get our understandings on paper while we're going through this process, not trying to remove it from future negotiations. I think, like I said, I think the future negotiations are going to center around a lot of these same things.
Okay. We can discuss that.
So-
Get back to you.
Yeah, maybe that'll be a topic for next time around too, figure out where we are, and if we have a difference of opinion on that, fine, but I would like to have both sides flesh out what their understandings are, it's just so if we're making decisions, it's not based on miscommunication.
Just other thing, not this helps you necessarily, because it's just more things that were in kind of your court, but we gave you a proposal last time on the use of facilities. The contentious issue there was, and it sounded like there may have been some previous miscommunication about what precisely the desire was, but just basically having the right to email each other sort of incidentally about, hey, we're meeting here, I need representation, that sort of thing on the college email. We also gave your proposal and you kind of verbally responded to it, but we talked about this issue of dependents being able to take courses at the college, and you said, well, are you asking us to have another section just to do that? And we kind of said, no, not really. We were thinking about this in terms of a marginal cost being zero to the college type of situation. And you said that might be something you'd consider. And we also gave you a proposal last time upon request on management rights. So maybe some of those are easy discussions, but just other things I happen to catch as being in your laps at the moment.
What was the dependents being able to take
Dependents
courses?
being able
What
to
was
take
that article?
courses, 14.11.
We did have discussions with it last time. I don't know if we advised you what the holdup, as I recall, and you chime in, was we need to have a broader internal discussion about that. And you thought you needed to run it by various people. It might take longer than certainly we had there. And I don't know if that's something over the next 2 weeks that you can have those discussions or not. Let us see. I mean, it wasn't a flat out no, we're not going to agree to. It was more we have to discuss the ramification consequences amongst more people than we had available at the time. That's still the
That's still, and we were going to also address some of employee benefits, since that proposal had originated at the Employee Benefits Committee several years out in numerous iterations. They've done surveys about usage and interest, gauging interest. So that might be something that we could
something that
revisit.
is doable in 2 weeks, or is that
No, not in 2 weeks, not with the entire committee.
I don't think it's an urgent priority necessarily. It's just something I happened to notice that.
No, I appreciate keeping it on our radar so that we can make sure we're progressing. We'll definitely commit to looking at Article 12, continue to look at these kinds of issues we brought up in the package, and then the email and facilities management rights we'll revisit on our side to see if that's something if we're in position to come back on. And 1411 too, although it sounds like it's not likely for next meeting. But and if anything, you come up between now and next meeting that you think, shoot me an email. I'll do
Right.
the same. There's not a lot of time, obviously, between these meetings with the way each side does things through committees and talking about it.
I guess
It's difficult.
the other thing I guess I could do, I mean, there's a lot of things that we haven't touched, but may not be very controversial, or maybe something we can work on if it's something you just kind of look at and have a question about. So I guess I just want to maybe even extend an invitation to do that if you happen to look at something but
At
have
one
questions
point-
about it but don't have.
Sorry to cut you off. At one point, we were looking at that I was thinking myself would be helpful for these things in putting together almost a chart. Here's what we have agreed. Here's what we're working on. Here's what
Pam is working on that.
And we've
Oh,
done
awesome.
that.
That's in her queue.
It's one of those things where it's aspirational. That, we'd love to have this to keep everybody moving forward. but it's also easy to kind of, well, we'll get to that later. I don't know if you guys have been working on that on your end, but we're happy.
We have,
Look at
yeah.
some of
We're
those
working
things.
on a chart with all the signed articles, the tentative agreements.
Grant,
Just-
do we
Yeah,
have that?
I have I'm looking at that now.
There you go.
I've got a PDF.
I don't know if that's something that you consider to be your work product or whether you want to circulate that, but that may be helpful that we get something almost mutual going, continuing.
I have some updates for you too, but I can share that, yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah, if we want to, then we can.
Work.
But I mean, reason I say that is because I feel like a lot of these may be very simple conversations, and like the parking thing. I mean, I feel like that's a pretty simple conversation, and we can probably come up with something that should address everyone's needs without a ton of back and forth. So I mean, if you just see things like that you don't have or don't want to take the time away from other things to come up with a full proposal about, but you just want to talk about it a little bit, I mean, that's fine with us. Some of this stuff is, like I said, probably simple enough that it could be moved along pretty quickly with just a little bit of conversation about it.
Well, we'll look at the full contract proposal and go back through it again.
I think it's
Sort of
Articles
haven't
9
done
and
that.
14 have a lot of that type of stuff. Maybe it seems like we're asking for a lot when we don't really mean to, and so I mean, I would hate for something simple to get held up because there's confusion or we've not communicated ourselves well about what it is that we're asking for.
All right, well, I'll review that and we'll look at it. Other than that, I think we're set to meet here again. 2 weeks from today, same time, whatever date that is.
August 6th.
Sixth?
Yeah.
Okay.
August 6th.
Just have something on the second.
And it was after the 6th is the 30th, and we're going back to Friday, starting on the 30th.
Yeah, okay, I have it 6th, and then the 30th was,
That's what I have. Yeah, I just want to make sure there wasn't anything else.
yeah.
Yeah, and that one has to end before 12:30, 1 o'clock. We have CA in the afternoon.
30th?
Yeah. So that be up to noon time.
It's August.
August 30th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the
Yes.
CA meeting.
Well, nothing like a little pressure of a deadline, I guess.
There you go.
That's when most things get done anyway. All right, well, that's all we had.
Okay, sounds good.
We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep.
I'll, I think I